foundation of our hearts will be raised with our fists.
Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke gave a press conference yesterday, and as always, he was completely full of crap. Almost everything he said was intended to distract you from the fact that he only has one simple tool at his disposal: creating money. Basically, our whole monetary system is a scam. And it seems we have tragically accepted the idea that the rich will always get richer while the poor will always get poorer. Well, this is how it happens. But it doesn't have to be this way. Pretty much everything Ben Bernanke said was intended to fool you into thinking that it is essential to the economy that he creates more money. When money is created, it goes into the hands of a very privileged few first, while your money loses value. This is called inflation, which really refers to an increase in inflation of the money supply, not a rise in prices. Even if prices are stable for consumers, they should be going down. As we naturally increase our productive capacity, the price of goods should go down and quality of life should go up. And it's not supposed to go up for just the well-connected few. When you hear about some exorbitant sum of money going to a corporate executive or banker or government contractor, just ask yourself, if we had a truly free market and the Federal Reserve didn't exist, could this person get paid that much? The price of gold is $1,536 an ounce, an all-time high, and it's not because of a surge in jewelry sales. It's because the value of the dollar relative to gold, a steady measure of value, is going down. Since 1913, it's lost about 95% of its value under the Federal Reserve System, and under Bernanke's current policy, this trend will continue to accelerate. There is nothing that gives the U.S. dollar any value other than a shared illusion, wishful thinking, and a devastating lie. Tune in, turn on, cash out. Joining me now from deep within his secret bunker, and we'll just say one of the flyover states, to get a better sense of the implications and significance of Ben Bernanke's press conference yesterday, is none other than Don Harold. Don, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So were you surprised by anything that Bernanke said yesterday?
Well, actually, I was pretty amazed at the lack of any real questions he had to answer. Excuse me. There was nothing asked of him that was even remotely important. There are a lot of questions I wanted to ask. But one thing that Bernanke did a lot of in his press conference yesterday was use the word crisis. I think it counted 4 or 5 times used the word crisis. And what I wanted to have someone ask was what role that he felt the Federal Reserve had in creating the supposed crisis.
What do you think you would have said to that?
Well, it would have been the same obfuscation that we saw that in 2007 was the Goldilocks economy, economic nirvana. We didn't know. And a lot of what the Fed has said since then is that no one could have seen what was coming. It was an impossible thing to have seen this crisis take place. But the answer to the question about the crisis is one I've been looking for the last 3 years, Adam, because you may remember that the reason we had a supposed crisis was something called toxic assets. Toxic assets, you may recall, were on the books of all these banks, and if we didn't give them access to our kids and our grandkids' money to infinity, they wouldn't pay down toxic assets. No paying down of the toxic assets. Mom and pop can't borrow money. They can't stock their shelves with widgets. They can't make payroll, etc. Well, something funny happened after TARP was passed. The then Secretary Hank Paulson, Treasury Secretary, said we're not going to pay down those toxic assets. Now, when you hear Ben Bernanke speak of a crisis in past tense, as he did in his press conference, I wish one reporter would stand up and ask him what happened to the toxic asset question. The next question I'd like to have answered is, Mr. Bernanke, you say you're going to continue into the foreseeable future now to continue to buy treasuries. Well, where do you get the money to do that? Where's that money coming from? Because you're simply printing money. It's the most incestuous relationship, Adam.
So it comes from us. It comes from we the people who are stuck holding the bag. Everybody who's got $1 in their wallet or $1 in their bank account. We're the ones that are paying for it.
Well, it's worse than that. Because if the Federal Reserve prints money, that we pay interest on. And then they are going to buy the debt that this country is creating to pay for all of this money printing. It's like a Ponzi scheme on steroids. And it's a house of cards that I wish someone would just raise their hand and say, listen, Mr. Bernanke, where are you getting this money to pay down all this debt? How are you buying this debt with what? And the truth is, he talked about his dual mandate, the Federal Reserve's dual mandate. The truth, Adam, is this. They keep talking about unemployment and keeping unemployment low. What they need to do is, what you brought up in the intro was on an efficient economy. Why in the world are we worried about 100% employment? Why don't we worry about making this economy more efficient? And the first place we could start by hiring people, Adam, we could hire a lot of people with $1 billion a day. We pay the Federal Reserve in interest payments every day. You want to make this economy more efficient? Let us have our money back. Give us TARP back. Let's stop paying interest to the Federal Reserve, and the economy becomes more efficient overnight. I just wish one of these reporters would have got up off their ass and asked a question that the rest of us want to have answered.
So what did you think of the market reaction? We saw the dollar plummeted, gold continued its surge. What else? What do you think of the market reaction to the press conference? There were a lot of preemptive fear-mongering, thinking that things were going to go really bad no matter what he said.
Well, the market right now is on a plane of existence I don't think many people understand. The money printing from the Fed has been, I guess, the word elixir or the magic potion to keep this thing floating. And I know that Bernanke said that he didn't see any material change in the market after they stopped buying the debt. I think that is nonsense. I don't think anybody believes that. And I think there's a lot of fear among big-time investors and at the Fed about what will happen to the market if they stop buying this debt.
So what does this mean for people that are for investors or would-be investors that don't have any money to invest at this point?
When you say don't have any money to invest, I don't understand.
Well, for the economy, for people who are looking for jobs, is the creation of this money going to help with the unemployment problem?
Well, there's an interesting problem with inflation. You notice he mentioned a couple times that inflation right now in food and energy was transitory. He said this about 5 or 6 times. Now, transitory means it's just coming and going. But for Americans who are on fixed incomes, meaning 99% of America, the $45,000 per household a year incomes, this transitory effect is not going to be transitory because a lot of people right now are having to borrow money from the future to pay for goods and services now. There is absolutely no way this economy gets in any good shape for people like you and me, you know, the little guys, until they do something about this rampant inflation.
Or until we find a way to divorce ourselves from this monetary policy altogether. And that's happening whether they like it or not, one way or another. If we go to a global fiat currency or local competing currencies, the dollar is not going to last long. Don, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was Don Harold of DayTradeShow.com, and it feels like what we're doing now, it's like watching the plot of Atlas Shrugged play out in real life without the trains, and Bernanke plays the villain perfectly. We also had some new numbers from the Labor Department today that might put a damper on some of the economic cheerleading propaganda we've been hearing from the White House. More in just a moment. Applications for unemployment benefits were up 25,000 to a seasonally adjusted 429,000 for the week ending April 23rd. You would think with numbers like this, most people would be grateful to have any job, and you would hope to hear something like that from public sector employee unions who work at the pleasure of we the people, who, for better or worse, have elected governments that employ people based on valuing their services. But that's not really the point of unions. Here are the fine people of Massachusetts rallying in solidarity with Wisconsin union workers back in February. Well, they had a rude awakening this morning. Yes, the Massachusetts House just voted 111 to 42 to strip police officers, teachers, and other municipal employees of most of their rights to bargain over health care. By the way, the Massachusetts State House has 128 Democrats and 32 Republicans. The justification from House Speaker, Democrat Robert A. DeLeo, was that this would save $100 million in the coming year by scaling back the health care costs of municipal employees. Apparently, there was some opposition from local unions, and Even Governor Patrick acknowledged the parallel to what we've seen in Wisconsin, saying they should dial it down because that's not what's happening here. So, like good, loyal partisan lackeys, they did dial it down. Remember what we saw in Wisconsin? When a Republican-controlled state government did almost the same thing in Wisconsin, it drew national outrage. In Massachusetts, done by Democrats, the politicians get a pass by comparison. This is why big unions are purely partisan political organizations. Another partisanship, remember this guy? He seems to be making a play at the GOP nomination for president. And by seems, I mean making a national joke of himself. But now his Republican credentials are being questioned by none other than freshman Republican Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who said today in New Hampshire, "I've come to New Hampshire today because I'm very concerned. I want to see the original long-form certificate of Donald Trump's Republican registration." Trump's lack of Republican credentials just show how ridiculous his candidacy is, and frankly, how his strong showings in recent polls makes me a bit embarrassed for my party. He was registered as a Democrat as recently as September of 2009, supported universal health care, and described himself as totally pro-choice. If this guy gets the nod, being a Republican will be completely meaningless. But let's follow the money for just a second here. Trump's donations. Who do they go to? All right, total here that we have on record, $1.36 million to various campaigns across the country. That's not chump change when it comes to the kind of elections that he's funding. Paltry $18,600 to independents, $611,000 to Republicans, but the majority, $731,000 to Democrats. So what does this guy know about the GOP?
Frankly, I wish there was a candidate that I saw that would be fantastic, because I love what I'm doing. In fact, I have a great club that's 15 minutes away. By the way, Ron Paul could not get elected, I'm sorry to tell you. Sorry.
We'll prove you wrong, you twisted bastard. And one of the ways we'll do it is with Veterans for Ron Paul. Since we announced our Facebook page just days ago on the show, we have tripled in likes. And I'd like to share this comment from a fellow former Marine from that page. Timothy Lafferty writes, "Let's put someone in the White House that understands exactly what it means to have the hearts and minds of the troops. Ron Paul 2012. Amen." By the way, I didn't get a chance to mention it during the show when we introduced Veterans for Ron Paul, but in the 2008 primary race, he got more campaign contributions from active duty soldiers than all other candidates combined. The choice of the troops and active duty troops is none other than fellow veteran Texas Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. When we come back, we'll speak with Dr. Glenn Stassen, professor of Christian ethics at Fuller Theological Seminary, editor of Just Peacemaking, the new paradigm for the ethics of peace and war, and have a special for more information covering everything from Bradley Manning to birthers. And no butt sex this time. And now, a message from your friendly local law enforcement.
The internal military mechanisms do not work to bring justice or accountability.
I have every right to know what my government's doing. You want to know why? I pay taxes.
Well, I would characterize Obama as a charismatic version of American exceptionalism.
how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
Let's not forget that we had an apartheid regime right here in America.
I think Barack Obama is beatable in 2012.
Whenever government says they're going to keep you safe, get ready because you're going to lose your freedoms.
Welcome back to Adam versus the Man. Our next guest, Glenn Stassen, is not your ordinary academic. From his writing to his political activism, Glenn is an unsung hero of the American freedom movement. As a young man, he was mentored by his father, Harold Stassen, who was governor of Minnesota and senior advisor to President Eisenhower. He received a lot of criticism from hawkish Republicans, mainly because Harold understood the problems of having a large military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower famously warned us of in his farewell address, a speech Stassen the Elder helped inspire. As a young Republican in the 1960s, following his father's footsteps, Glenn Stassen challenged his friends, including the young Mitch McConnell, to not be swayed by the military-industrial complex. He also broke ranks with many fellow Southern Baptists when he marched on to Washington, D.C. with Martin Luther King, Jr., joining the call for peace and equal rights. Interestingly, Glenn is known as the inspiration that led the Hollywood writers of TV series 24 to get Jack Bauer's character to stop torturing. He is the author of dozens of articles and books, and his newest, Just Peacemaking, 10 Practices for Abolishing War, is a must-read. Join us now from Pasadena, California, the director of the Just Peacemaking Initiative at Fuller Theological Seminary, Glenn Stassen. Glenn, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hi, thanks. What a great introduction. You've done some research. Neat.
Well, I want to ask you about what's going on in Afghanistan. We saw the recent attack by an old Afghan pilot, 20-year veteran of the force there.
Yeah.
Seemed like he, it's hard to tell the details from the reports. Looked like he snapped, but we've had 7 such incidents recently of Afghan soldiers turning on fellow soldiers or U.S. personnel there. What does this say about the morality of our policy in Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, as your setup rightly said, morality for me means something constructive, and so it means just peacemaking practices. You know, when Obama made his Nobel Award speech, he named all 10 practices of just peacemaking. So, one of the practices is...
Is he employing any of them?
What's that?
Is he employing any of them?
Now and then. He's improved relations with Muslims generally by showing some respect and acknowledging some of our past problems with them. And that's one of the practices, acknowledge your own complicity. So, and therefore, the huge explosion in the number of international terrorist incidents that happened under Bush, from 200 a year to 14,000 a year, now is slowly reducing. So he's done some conflict resolution with Muslims and also acknowledging some of the, arrogant stuff that was done.
Well, your father was an advisor to President Eisenhower. I want to play a clip from his famous farewell address. Let's roll that.
Okay.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
So do you think we have in any way taken that measure of warning to heart? Have we lived up to the standard, or have we allowed the military-industrial complex to completely undermine our liberty and the democratic process?
When Ronald Reagan became president, the military budget was $150 billion. Now it's $750 billion plus other expenses that, aren't counted in the military budget. meaning about $1 trillion. That's a huge, huge increase. My dad was, of course, Eisenhower was a military hero. My dad was a captain in the Navy in World War II, and I worked at the Naval Research Lab as a physicist. But Dad, in his way, knew something of the military-industrial complex too. So, have we lived up to that standard? Is that, I mean, what is the state today? Have we in any way protected ourselves, or is what we're seeing today the worst prediction that Eisenhower could have envisioned with your father in terms of that unwarranted influence? Yeah, I think we have succumbed to the threat. The Democrats live in fear of being seen as soft on some enemy or critical of the military expenditures. And the Republicans want them to live in that fear, so they keep insisting on this huge military budget, which is about 60% of our expenditures that could be cut. So in all the debates that we're hearing here on Capitol Hill about cutting the budget and looking at the deficit and adjusting taxes and whatnot, the military, the defense spending isn't really being touched. What do you think that says about our system at this point? Well, isn't it right that Obama now is promising to cut the military budget with his proposal for how we get rid of some of this deficit? That's what I've read, that it's part of Obama's plan to cut it down. So far, we haven't done it, obviously. But finally, I think it's getting into the discussion. Okay. Mitch McConnell, your childhood friend, tell us about that. Do you think how has he developed compared to what you expected of him as a senator? Well, childhood is not right, but young adult friends. Okay. Yeah, as soon as he got elected senator, I met with him and tried to encourage him to reduce some of the offensive nuclear weapons that are such a threat to the whole world. And he said, "I'm sorry, but I've already committed myself. I really can't. I don't have any openness." He's committed himself to military expenditure as part of his way of getting support for his being able to lead the Senate. That's simple. Sold his soul. He's not an open mind. All right. So one of the things that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, and for me personally, from my experience in Iraq working in civil affairs, was that all the things that we've traditionally done, or a lot of things that we've traditionally done under the guise of aid and development, international aid and development, are now being militarized. A lot of those functions through USAID are being handled by members of the military. What do you think is the cause of that? That's really true. It's so militarized, the policy. One of the practices of just peacemaking is sustainable economic development, and that's crucial for Afghans. They know that, I mean, the joblessness is huge, the economic need is huge. They need to rebuild their country, but that doesn't need to be rebuilt by Americans. It needs to be rebuilt by Afghans who can get some jobs doing that. And so they know that just the way overwhelming U.S. expenditure is for troops that are firing on folks instead of economic aid, and the economic aid gets run by the military. So it then causes anger by Afghans who are traditionally hostile to foreign intervention. Outstanding. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, sir. Really appreciate your time. Okay, good. That was Director of Just Peacemaking Initiative at Fuller Theological Seminary, Glenn Stassen. So now we have a special segment of For More Information, FMI, from feedback with you, the viewer. We watch, when we have our episodes posted on YouTube, we actually read every comment, at least within the first 24 hours. And so I'd like to share and respond to some of those right here. This from YouTube Admin Sucks Ass. I know, we're getting close, but we're going to try to keep it clean today. As an aging Cold Warrior, it is so odd to watch free speech on Russia Today and hardcore propaganda on MSNBC, Fox, CBS, etc. Thank you. It's nice to know that it's being appreciated. Our guest from yesterday, Jim Hansen, talking about Bradley Manning, also invoked a certain reaction from Mavis Zero when he said, "The American military is the greatest force for good in the world." Seriously, Adam, where do you find these people? Matt X Max 187 wrote, "Where did you find this warhawk, Adam? Paul Wolfowitz, Neocon University. He makes Neocon Nancy look like a bleeding heart liberal." All right, so going to Facebook now, Marcus Widehour writes, "So on the day Chairman of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, is having a press conference,
the White House decides to take away attention from that and release the president's birth certificate. For those of you that haven't been following the story, yesterday Donald Trump took credit for the president having released his birth certificate after all these years. And it does strike me a little odd, this timing, that it just so happened to be the day of the Ben Bernanke press conference. Don't pay attention to the important issues. Here's a little birther scandal, and here's a little Donald Trump and his ridiculousness for you. Kim Shady, also by Facebook, writes, "We will remain a nation of presumed guilt until the people once again understand natural law." And this is in regards to Bradley Manning and Obama's statement about him saying of presumed guilt. She writes, "Incarceration rates per 100,000 citizens. USA, 754. Islamist Saudi Arabia, 178. Communist China, 120. Germany, 85. Japan, 59. Now, this is really fascinating because I've done some research on this, and I verified Kim's numbers from the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the Justice Policy Institute. And as we measure up, the United States here, with 1 in 138 people now in jail, more than 2.1 million U.S. citizens in prison, we are the least free country on earth. Also on Facebook regarding Bradley Manning, John J. Myers writes, "The idea that we are keeping this guy in prison without a trial is an outrage. I don't care what you think about him. Personally, I think he is the Daniel Ellsberg of our day," which is a good thing. But the problem is, by keeping him detained for years on end, you have to wonder, is anyone else going to follow his lead, considering people now see that they keep you in prison for years in prison without a trial? It's quite a deterrence against patriotism or even doing the right thing. That's why it's so important to treat whistleblowers with respect and make sure that they are given the full safety that they're supposed to be accorded under the rule of law. My good friend and fellow former Republican candidate for Congress, now a potential candidate for the Libertarian nomination for president, R.J. Harris, writes, "Manning may well have broken the laws," I say may, not he did, "but the presidential pardon authority exists because there just might be the case where a law is broken that needed to be broken or the punishment received was unjust. You can bet that I would exercise this authority in Private Manning's case should my President Exploratory Committee turn into a successful presidential campaign. Moreover, I would also direct the Department of Justice to fully investigate the events of Manning's incarceration and prosecute any and all human rights violations. Following orders will not avail the guilty." If only we lived in such a world. Margaret Malik from Facebook writes, "It seems I share your shows, but no one wants to take the time. Have you thought about making some short clips of your show?" I'm sorry no one's wanted to take the time, but we will. We are at a disadvantage, I know, to some of the other shows on this network, and starting Monday, we will be dividing the show up into segments for posting on YouTube. So, also from YouTube, another comment here about negative neocon Nancy. "Jake Diliberto has proven that he isn't a neocon. No neocon would support someone they didn't agree with. He's worked with both liberals and Ron Paul, and in both cases he has said that he doesn't agree with everything that they think. That takes a kind of wisdom that more real conservatives and real liberals need to adopt." Hey, that's not true. Neocons have no souls, no morals, and no guiding principles, and they support people they disagree with all the time for the sake of political expediency. But yeah, Jake's not a neocon. He is, however, hosting tomorrow's show. That's right, tune in tomorrow for a special edition of this show. Jake Diliberto presents the Adam versus the Man Royal Wedding Spectacular, featuring Luke Rudowski and Charlie Veach if he's out of jail in time. I'll be enjoying my day off by hunting down someone who thinks that because they were born to certain parents, they can tell other people how to live their lives. Hope you tune in. This is Adam Kokesh from Washington, D.C. Good night.